Robyn, welcome to Women Finding Clarity.
I am so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited for you to be here. And, a huge thanks to Manessa Kanecki for connecting us. And the more I started to delve into you and what you were about and your books, I'm like, we are 100% meant to meet.
Yeah, I agree. I think, obviously my specialty is kind of in leadership and career, but, we're regular people. And I think that's something that's important to talk about is not just your work life, but your whole life and how you present yourself and the goals you have for yourself. So I'm excited to talk about all that.
Yeah, I'm so excited too. I feel like you and I definitely are on the same, I'm going to call it beam.
All right.
um, because your business is called Beamably.
Yes.
And I want to talk about that. How did it start? And I just want you to tell everyone all the amazingness that you're doing.
Sure. Yeah. So I started Beamably, which is my leadership technology company. And one of my goals was sort of to transition the way that many people approach leadership. So I've said this before, but there's this old parable about the sun and the wind. And in the parable, the sun and the wind make a bet about who can get a traveler to take off their cloak. And the wind goes first and bears down on the traveler, but they only tug on their coat as tight as possible. And then the sun comes next, and the sun shines down on the traveler, warms them, and they take off the coat voluntarily. And I love this as a sort of parable for the sort of shift that we need to see happen with leadership. We've had plenty of wind coming at us, right? A lot of very aggressive leadership, a lot of very harsh treatment, and a lot of narrative that says it has to be the way because that's the only way to get people to perform. But it's not true. It's a way to get people to perform, and it has a lot of cons associated with it. Maybe there are some pros. You can get some bursts of efficiency and effectiveness. Great. But for the long term, what we see is much more effective is make sure people have what they need, make sure people feel confident and safe, and they will be great performers. Make sure they're people that you trust, they're in the right role, do your responsibility as a leader, but to approach it from a much, much more positive place.
So beautiful. And, I like to talk about it from the aspect of feminine and masculine
Sure.
energies. And very much the way you just said it falls in line with that, right? We have historically been in a push, motivate through criticism, maybe, or, all of that. And I just love what you're coming around and bringing this idea of let's lean into your strengths, let's lean into your values and become the leader you were meant to be authentically.
Yeah. And there's absolutely some strong, solid evidence that, and of course, we want to be inclusive. It's not solely masculine, feminine, but there are some traits that are found more commonly in women leaders that work very well with this paradigm and are very effective. And there are some traits that are associated more commonly with men who are leaders. And those are just, patterns that we've observed. But certainly anybody can use a certain set of techniques to be a more positive leader. That's available to everyone.
Absolutely. And I just want to clarify, my listeners are more used to hearing me talk about energy. And so masculine energy, feminine energy aren't necessarily sex related. They're more energies and qualities that all of us have, right? And so whether you identify as man, woman, them, whatever it is,
Yep.
we all carry masculine and feminine.
Yep.
And so, yeah, so let's talk a little bit about that. What qualities, since we're talking about men and women right now, what qualities do you find are maybe more common and effective in leadership for women and then again for men?
Yeah. So, leadership is all about people, right? And I think that women are tend to be more tuned in to the idea that they need to care for the people, and that is how you're going to generate the results. Or to even just put a emphasis on caring for the people solely for the sake of doing that. I see that pretty commonly, and sometimes there's kind of a natural fit there. And sometimes it's not even necessarily that way. We get a lot of messaging in pop culture and especially from previous bosses that either you've had or that have been senior executives at your company. And so there's just so much messaging that says, be forceful, be aggressive, fake it till you make it. A lot of these things that don't serve us very well these days. So the things that kind of lean into are more of that authenticity, more of that empathy, and more thought going into each of the people, what's going on with them, what do they need to be able to perform, and then setting them up for all of that so that they can be the best version of themselves.
Mm, that's beautiful. And it is all about the people, right?
Yeah.
The people who are leading and the people who are being led or
Yes.
who are being, you know, nurtured and cared for and made to shine. And
Yeah.
I think that's more of the issue, right? Is let's all let our most beautiful parts shine through because that's where we'll be the most successful.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of attractiveness to the idea of somebody who's brilliant, right? They're just this, like shining figure, and they're going to come in and take everything by storm and cause so much disruption and do so many things. And there's a role for disruption, there's a role for innovation. Fantastic. But no matter how brilliant any one individual person may be, they could be the best hotshot ever. There's a limited amount that they can do. So even if you're an extreme workaholic and you work, as many hours in the day as you can possibly be awake, and you've got brilliant ideas, this, that, we're just to the point where unless you're working on something small that's really just related to you, there's no way that any individual can compare with what a team can do. So orienting towards your team, building a strong team, thinking about their needs, thinking about how they work together, making sure they're informed, and then valuing their perspectives, their ideas, their innovations, their creativity. That's really where you're going to get so many more results. And so, yeah, like in a movie, a certain figure like this may be very charismatic and attractive and interesting to watch. But if you were to imagine, somebody who has those characteristics day to day life, we've all worked for that person and they think they're amazing and that they're just above everyone else. And they are terrible to work for. Nobody wants to work for a leader like that.
Yes. I'm laughing, for anybody who's watch or listening without the video. I'm laughing just because, yes, I've had that boss.
Yep.
We've all had that boss. And, you know, unfortunately, some are still that boss, right?
Yes.
And the work that you're doing to shine a light on this more positive, more collaborative way to lead and be part of a team is just so important. And
Yes.
it's really exciting to see that the world is really taking more and more steps toward that end.
Yeah, it's very real. I work with people, in all different types of organizations. Some of them work for nonprofits, some of them work in the education system, some of them work for corporations, all different areas. And there is a very strong trend of people who, it's very similar to parenting in a lot of ways. We have the gentle parenting movement and many other similar movements where maybe that's not how you grew up, but it is how you want to raise your children. Same thing in leadership. I experienced in my career a lot of very aggressive managers, a lot of very aggressive treatment, the dog eat dog world. And while it may not seem like it, or people may not say this, you don't have to perpetuate that. You don't have to be a part of that. They're going to tell you that you do because it's the only way, but it's not the only way. And it's not even necessarily a good way of getting the results that they think they're getting. It's just what people have witnessed.
Yeah. So I know that you recently had a book launch. Congratulations, by the
Thank
way.
you.
So exciting, like
Yes.
gold. Um, and it's called Happy at Work.
Yes.
How to create a happy, engaging workplace. And so let's dive into that a little bit. And can you kind of share maybe what is a favorite chapter or, how it all came together for you and what you love about it?
Absolutely. Yes, Happy at Work. So the publisher approached me and they said, we know a lot of people are struggling with workplace culture. Can you create something that would be a guide for people who are looking to fix that problem? And I said, yes, but you might not necessarily like what I have to say about it. And here's why. I think that what we've seen a lot of is culture initiatives, right? So I remember, a certain job that I had in the past, they put a foosball table in the kitchen, and that was the culture initiative. And listen, it's not like it wasn't fun. It was fun, but it didn't fix the fundamental issues. So if you're just only going to read one part of the book, read the opening section. There's a brief history of kind of what culture has meant in the workplace, where it's kind of gone wrong, and then the fundamental things that need to be done to address workplace culture. I'll tell you what they are. So, in order for a person to have an opportunity to feel happy at work, they need to feel three more fundamental things. They need to feel safe at the workplace, they need to feel respected in the workplace, and they need to feel valued. If you don't fix those fundamental issues, then it doesn't matter if you buy everybody t-shirts or if you have pizza on Fridays or you paint the office purple. Those things are not going to change the most important factors. If people are overworked, underpaid, those things, they simply don't compensate. And we've seen a lot of attempting that. And so what I've done in the book is I explain all of that in the beginning, and then it's broken into 10 sections, and each section has 10 specific tips. And the sections are things like addressing mental health, your personal leadership, work-life balance, system and structural issues within the business. And so each one of those I try to make as clear and concise as possible and to really make it constructive. A lot of times there's certain things you can't do, and it depends on your role within the business. If I just got promoted into being a manager, there's probably lots of things I can do, but I can't change our payroll policy or our PTO policy, right? So I'm not going to work on those. I'm going to work on these things. There's always things that you can do. And it does make a real difference in the lives of the people around you. When you are in a leadership role, and that could be anywhere, it could be volunteering, it could be at work, it could be in one of the other types of organizations. You're an important figure. I think in this day and age, you're even almost like I call it a semi-public figure, right? Because it's known that that's your set of responsibilities. And at any time, an email you sent could get leaked, a call you were on could get published. So you got to really think about, how am I going to present myself? Because I don't have the security of just privacy. Not that that really should be covering up bad behavior, but sometimes it does. So you should think about, am I proud of all of my actions, my words? Am I doing my very best every day to be supportive and hold ourselves to that standard? Because if leaks do happen, then you want to be proud of the way that you've conducted yourself.
I feel like I just have to sit here and take it all in because you've just given us so much valuable information. And I wish I had the book in front of me right now so I could, read off some highlighted points and all of that. But a couple of things that I just want to pull from what you said. First of all, leadership being like parenting. And I've talked on the show previously about the fact that when my kids were little, I remember thinking to myself, okay, I'm going to mindfully parent in a way that if I forgot to hang up the phone and someone was still on the other line listening, how do I want to show up? Right?
Yeah,
How do I want them to overhear the way I'm speaking to my children?
I love that.
And yeah, and I feel like that translates into work culture so much,
It does.
not just in our conversations with clients or potential clients, but in our conversations with our team, with our coworkers, with colleagues, with, people from other businesses that we interact with. What if someone was always on the other end of the line listening?
Yeah. It's an excellent, check for check and balances. And obviously, in a perfect world, we don't need oversight in that way. But I think it does help as a reminder. And there's a couple things in play, right? There are there are observations that have influenced you for your entire life. So whether it's in parenting, whether it's in your work life or any one of many other areas, you've observed a lot of behaviors. You've experienced those maybe from the other side, and they've become normalized in a lot of ways. So even if that isn't the type of behavior you want to be executing, it's very easy to either let some of that slip in or default to some of those behaviors. And so, yeah, if that helps you remember, like, this is how I want to be, this is how I need to like take those pauses, self-regulate so that I can show up in the way that I need to show up, it works great. And, certainly the other thing that to think about is, you're not the only person in this environment. So sometimes somebody can come in with a certain type of energy, and that can really influence the situation, and that influences you, right? So even if you have amazing intentions, you're somebody who absolutely respects all of the people around you, you value them. You could either feel that pressure or that sort of energy is kind of affecting you, and maybe you're starting to shift. And I think especially for women who tend to be a little bit more aware of all of those influences and very adaptive and open to responding to those types of influences, it can be a ongoing experience to attempt to regulate and to ingest all of that information, think about every single person who's at play here, and then with intention, try to behave in the way that you want to behave. And I definitely find that as a parent, as a worker in lots of different situations.
I feel like we're never going to be finished learning ever, right? It's a
Oh yeah.
continual process of iteration and redoing and doing better and all of that. But I think going back to your guidepost of safety, of
Yes.
feeling safe, feeling respected, and feeling valued, right?
Yes.
So let that be your stake in the ground that if I am mindful that I want every person to feel this way, that can be the bar that you set yourself against,
Yeah.
with every interaction.
Yeah. And it's a
Feeling the
helpful.
feelings that are coming up and saying, all right, if I respond this way, giving yourself that breath. And
Yes.
if I respond this way, does the person feel safe, respected, and valued?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
Sorry
and
to
you can
interrupt you. Go ahead.
observe. Absolutely. No, you can observe how people behave. And even, sometimes we react to people's behavior because of an emotional response that we're feeling, or simply another person's behavior is confusing to us or we don't understand it. But if you ask yourself those questions, oh, well, maybe are they feeling unsafe? Are they feeling not valued? Are they feeling disrespected? A lot of things that people complain about in the workplace, rightfully, come back to those three issues, right? So if I am being asked to work on the weekends, usually it's not the case of that I'm just mad about the time or that I am, unable to do that. I can't do it. A lot of times I could do it, right? But I don't feel valued. I don't feel that you value my time by making that request. And if you request it once or twice for reasonable reasons, then, probably that's perfectly fine. And I can understand what you're, communicating, and you can understand what I'm communicating. And that shows respect. But if it's all the time and it's simply that you're trying to take as much of my time as you can possibly get from me, you don't feel valued at all. And so a lot of times the issues that we have in the workplace come back to some of those core things. They've made you feel unsafe is another thing too, where you come around to topics like inclusion. A lot of that is that people don't feel safe in the work environment because they feel different. If I feel like my perspective isn't valued here, if I feel like I'm not welcome here, I don't feel safe here. And I know people want to like claw that back to just physical safety. This is a perfectly safe neighborhood, blah, blah, blah. But it's more than that. It's easy to feel destabilized enough that you feel unsafe to express yourself, unsafe to be here, unsafe that you're going to be here tomorrow because of whatever volatility is going on in the business that you can't control. So, yes, it's a great little tool to kind of keep in your back pocket and like evaluate as you work with different people and you like get into different situations.
Sure, absolutely. And I feel like as we're speaking, the word that's coming up for me that's so important is communication.
Yeah.
And so, can you talk a little bit about communication and how that fosters a happier workforce, a happier team?
Absolutely. So we could talk about that on kind of a macro or a micro level. Maybe we'll talk micro first because there's some fun things. Little communication, like preferences and tweaks, actually can make a really big difference. So I've got some stuff in the book about things like, keep an eye on your communication window. Like, when are we working and am I sending you communications outside of that time window? This can be hard with global teams or dispersed teams or people in different time zones. But even so, it's worth it. And there's little things that your boss can do too. Every single person feels terror in their heart when their boss sends them like a last minute meeting invitation or like a message that just says like, hey, can we talk? Those things are terrifying. So from a micro perspective, there's no reason as the manager, you can't say, I have a question for you about the project that we have going on. I need to understand the status. Could you please call me? That's an extra sentence that adds a lot of valuable context and will save someone from having a heart attack. But on the macro level, it's important too. We have to take communication seriously as a really significant responsibility as a leader. It's something that I personally always have to push myself on because you're so busy, right? You've got so many things that are priorities and that you're trying to do, but you can't forego good, solid communication. And that also goes two ways. It comes back around to listening too. Something I've seen a lot of, and I would say the last 10 to 12 years, is listening as a placation device. So basically, you, the manager, or maybe you, HR, are listening to the employee so that they feel heard. But people don't feel heard if you're just you have to do more than just recognize their feelings. You have to do something about it. So if your person is telling you, I don't have enough time to complete this project, and you say, I hear you, I understand your perspective, it's so important, thank you for telling me, and then the project goes on exactly as it was before, that doesn't make you feel very valued or respected, right? So it comes back around to those things. So I think a lot of people currently in management positions don't have necessarily very strong listening skills and don't take on enough responsibility. And I think, whether this is conscious or not, they don't value the perspectives of others enough. They think that, they understand everything they need to know about the situation, and so they don't take action. But again, the value of all those perspectives is so important. Don't give that up. It's a incredible tool that is available to you. And the more trust you build with different people, the more information you're going to get from it. Don't give it up.
Absolutely. I mean, the beauty of a podcast, before we started recording, I said, I have no vision of how this is going to go. It's literally a conversation.
Yeah.
We'll see where it takes us, right? And so being open, of course, there needs to be structure, but being open to just see where it takes you sometimes by what you were just saying, leaning into other people's ideas, different perspectives, it can be magic.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are challenges to that too, right? So it's hard then to say, here's exactly what's going to happen over the next 6 months if you need to be constantly taking in information. This is something I see that I guess people aren't as aware of, right? So we have reached this point in the world where there is constant change happening around us all of the time. Things are not the same before this conversation as they're going to be after this conversation because different things will have taken place. If you're a good listener who thinks carefully and acts responsibly when you hear and receive information, then it can be difficult to say, this is the plan, know what to expect, we're sticking to it. I think we do have to acknowledge that whether it's in business or in other areas, we do exist in this environment of constant change. I'm going to tell you what I know. I'm going to be honest about what I don't know. I'm going to acknowledge change when it occurs, and I'm going to check in with you to make sure you have the information you need and that you've shared information with me that I need as we go along. And that's an ongoing thing. It can be hard because I think as people, we would love more structure. We would love to know exactly what to expect as we go into every workday, but that's not something, even as the boss, that you can always guarantee.
especially as the boss.
Yeah, especially as the boss.
Yeah, yeah. So trust is another word that I feel like is coming up for me as I'm listening to you talk. And there's a big vulnerability in saying, this is what I know, and this is what I don't know.
Yeah.
And so, how do you suggest that, as a leader, you create a container where someone feels safe and a container of trust where it's okay to be vulnerable?
I think I think this is something you have to practice, especially if this is different for you, if you have always been told to lead from a place of authority and confidence and fake it till you make it, then this is going to be a big change. And I recognize that. And that's not just, how you are. That's what you were taught to do. So sometimes it's very strange to one day be taught you're supposed to do it a different way. And I trained myself how to be this way, right? I trained myself how to be poised. I was always told that that was so important. And now it's more important for me to be authentic, right? Like that's a change. So, to be honest, there's another thing in the book that I include that's similar, which is apologizing. It's important to practice these things, to know what kind of language you want to use, to know how you want to behave in the moment, because sometimes you're not going to be your perfect self. You're not going to be totally neutral and ready to go when a situation happens. Somebody catches you in a mistake, or they ask you a question that you don't know the answer to, or you don't have a good answer to right now. It's important to be able to recognize maybe you're feeling embarrassed, maybe you're feeling challenged or nervous, right? Those are real feelings, and just ignoring them doesn't necessarily work because that can cause a little bit more harshness than what you intend in the answer. So one, like recognizing that you're going to find yourself in those situations. And then two, thinking about how do you want to respond. I was actually meeting with somebody earlier today and we were talking about this. What if you get one of these questions that we don't have the answer to right now? How are we going to handle it? And here's what we're going to identify. We're going to be specific, say what we know, say what we don't know. If possible, can we share why we can't answer that question right now? Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. It kind of depends, and be forthright about it. And then I think another thing that's important there is then just that's not the end of this conversation. You had a very legitimate question that you asked me, and now I owe you that information if at all possible. Right. So if I can, I need to go and continue my responsibility, which is to go and find the information that you need. Or if it's something that's more sensitive or it's truly an unknown, like we don't know what's going to happen, but here are different scenarios, to as events unfold, to continue to talk with you about, okay, here's what this means. Here's what could happen. Here's what we know. Here's a new piece of information. How are we going to react to it? And to be like in that together, you and me working on the problem, recognizing this information. It takes some work. And if your workplace, especially, isn't really like that, it's much more important for you to have that authority and everybody around you is looking for that. It can feel really scary to start to do that, but you can absolutely do it without losing your respectability, I think there can be authority that's found in not knowing because you're being very open and honest.
And you're giving your team permission to not know all the
Yeah.
answers.
Yep. And to make mistakes too. Like sometimes you come back around and you say, I was wrong about that. I need to make a correction. That happens to me all the time. And I need to say, I thought it was this. I had to double check. Here's the truth. Here's what that means and how it's different from what I said before. I apologize for the error. Here's what we're going to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as a leader, it's so hard to keep all these pieces pulled together. It's so important for everyone to feel heard, to feel safe, to feel valued, to feel respected, to get the work done, right? So there's so many strings that you have to keep pulling together
Yep.
towards this end goal. And so how do you find the balance in all of that?
Well, you can't do it alone, and it's important that you don't make that mistake. And I do think a lot of people do make that mistake. They like pile it all on their own plate, and there they go, right? I have to make everything perfect for the people around me. And that's not very realistic. So, something we haven't talked too much about is there's a really critical responsibility for managers and for leaders in general, and that is building their team. Now, I'm not talking about team building where it's like just trust exercises within the team. There's a little bit of that, but actually the construction of the team comes before that. So, who's on the team? What are their responsibilities? What do they understand? What are they prepared for? What role do they play? And how do they interact with the other people on the team? What is this team expected to do? How can I project that out? Do I have enough people to cover all of those responsibilities? These are really critical. So you have to be able to know what's coming, be able to know what's necessary to get all of that done. And then you have to make sure that you have smart, capable people who are prepared for all of that appropriately, have the information, and then have the power and authority to do the things that are expected of them. And that is really hard. It sounds hard because it is hard. We talked about a lot of pieces of information that you need right there. You know, what is the skill level of this person? What training have they received? What work projects are coming up? And sometimes those are unknown too, which can make it extra difficult, but at least a healthy projection. Those are really important responsibilities. I find that sometimes certain managers don't work on those things at all. They're very reactive, but you have to be pretty proactive if you're going to approach this in a responsible way.
Yeah. Proactive, I feel like, is the name of the game here.
Yeah.
If you want to lead differently, and that's everything you're about is leading differently. And so it's
Yep.
being proactive. It is, you know, having an idea of what you want it all to look like and then breaking it down into smaller pieces
Yep.
and saying, okay, this is what I want it to look like. How do I get there? How do I make it happen?
Yes.
And so part of that truly is going within and knowing who you really are.
Yeah.
And so one thing that I love is that you have a workbook,
Yes.
and it's called Be True to Yourself, the Personal Values Workbook. And when I work with my clients, that's one of the things we always start with are our personal values because it influences so much.
Yeah, it's very true. It sounds very basic, but I find a huge relief in defining your values for yourself. And one thing I do in my workbook is we do two things. We identify what values I stand for, which ones give me a positive feeling and I feel really strongly about, and this is what I stand for in the world, and also what things I stand against. So it uses the same list of values for people to react to, and you can say these are ones that I react to negatively, and these are things that when I encounter them, these do not work for me. And this is often very relevant in workplace situations because if your business, your company that you work for, or the manager that you work for, or the CEO you work for, have core values that are in direct opposition to yours. You know, they stand for a particular thing. That's something that they really value, and it's something that just doesn't work for you. It is always going to feel unpleasant, uncomfortable, kind of gross to be in that situation. Some people can decide that they're okay with that, especially if they recognize what it is. And here's how I'm going to create a sort of buffer between that and me, how I can recognize those two things differently. But in other cases, I've had people say to me, if I had done this workbook earlier in my career, I would have known not to work for that person. I would have known not to take this type of job because it's in conflict with my values. So it is basic, but I did this exercise myself many years ago. For a long time, did it as a live workshop. And I get really great reactions to it every time. So I'm always happy to share.
I love that. It's true. It feels basic, and yet
Yeah.
it really can be the spine of the whole body of the rest of your life, right?
Yeah.
Because once our brains are fully developed, it's so important to really do that internal reflection, figure out who we are, what, like you said, what we stand for, what we stand against, what we want to support, what's important, what's kind of neutral, and what is absolutely not, right?
Yeah.
Because that influences our partner, our friendship, how we raise our children, the jobs that we take,
Yep.
every all of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and people sometimes ask me, well, do they change, right? Are they always the same? And do they change over time? And I think it's different for different people, but I think they can change. Something that might happen is you might recognize that something you valued when you were younger, or maybe when you were closer to your family, or you were in a certain environment, something that was so important to you then, when you get free from that environment, you realize, oh, well, I felt like I had to do that. I felt like I had to drive in this certain way, or I had to be this certain way because of the things, the external forces. So yeah, sometimes I think people can find that there's a little bit of change, or sometimes what they can find is I encourage people to define their values for themselves. So I'll give you an example, right? Let's say you've got me and my mom. And we both have a really important value. We both really value family. But the way that I value family and the way I define family as a value is different than hers. And hers is something like never let your family down. And mine is something like care for everyone around you. Well, those they could be the same. Right. I think probably in our case they are. But for a lot of people, they're very much not the same. And so a person can be coming to you and they can say, family is the most important thing in the world to me, but they're acting in a way that's very contradictory to your personal definition of family. Like, I would never make my child feel shamed in the way that I feel shamed by you. This is not my real mom. She's wonderful.
Yeah.
But I see a lot of these kinds of situations and they're very real. People have a family member or a boss or a work colleague, and they have something very aggressive that they feel very strongly about, and it's just in conflict in that way. And so we could say that we believe in the same thing, but if we believe it differently, coming upon that understanding of yourself is I find it's a relief, because I can say it's not that we just can't get along. It's that we have this conflict. And in some cases, maybe it's so fundamental that there are just certain things that we can't do together.
And if we are stepping into a role, into a new job with a particular company, and we don't feel in resonance, we don't feel aligned
Yeah.
with the values of that company, we're not going to show up as our best selves. We're not going to be able to put our best foot forward because there's always going to be this place in the back of our heads or in the back of our heart, um, where we're feeling just the ugh of all of it, right? And
Yeah.
so I think it's important to know, if you really do want to be happy at work, be very particular about where you work,
Yeah, if you can, right? So I
if you can.
recognize we all have different, like we're in a tough job market right now. Sometimes you can be really choosy, and sometimes you might make decisions where you say, this is the best situation for me right now. And I think it's important to
Absolutely.
acknowledge that, because like there are these realities, but there's also these non-realities to think about. I think a lot of times we're told, like, if you don't value money, then you're never going to be successful. And maybe I don't value money, right? But I do value being successful. It's just that I've been told that that's such an important signifier of success that if I don't care about it, then I'm going to be viewed as an unsuccessful person. And so what is really difficult about that is that messaging can be so strong that it shapes you, right? And you take in that information, and then you're like, well, I have to go down this type of career path, because if I don't, what will that mean about me? And you start to shape and reshape, and you're sort of fitting yourself into this environment. And for some people, that's not necessarily particularly difficult. They might just say, okay, well, I lean more into these traits when I'm doing this type of thing, when I'm doing my work. But for other people, they may have been forced into an environment that just isn't right for them because they were told this is the only way. And I find that that's why people study certain things in college. That's why people choose certain types of jobs because they feel that it's respectable. And I think what we have to recognize is that there's been a lot of change in the world. It's easier than it was before to do things that are different. There are more diverse opportunities available to us all. There's more global access for us all. And so just because we were told something doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. It's important to think about that, see how it feels, and then it's never too late to decide this isn't the type of thing that I want to be doing. I can still find my own type of success in a different environment.
And I think that that goes back to the internal reflection of what does success mean to me?
Yep.
What does a happy workplace mean to me? It's always going back and kind of letting your own self be I I don't even know how to explain it really, but the guidepost isn't the right word, but just always going back and saying, how does this feel to me?
Yeah,
Right?
yes, that's your moral compass, right? I think something
Yeah.
interesting that we are seeing is there's trends, right? And there's a generational shift happening right now too. And, no matter what generation you're in, I do think that affects us all. Like, for example, we could say that one generation values comfort more than what we might have seen in the past. And that might give somebody the ick, right? Like, oh, that's not the way you're supposed to be. That's not what I was taught. But think about that kind of more independently for a minute. Valuing comfort sounds great. Why should we want people to be uncomfortable? Where did that come from? Like, yes, you should always be working on bettering yourself. Great. But there's nothing wrong with seeking, certain things in your life that just work for you. And I do think we're seeing not only some shifting of values between generations and as like kind of the world changes itself, but also more awareness of that. So even if that's not coming directly from my generation, I'm still seeing that. And maybe it's confusing, maybe it's exciting, but it's real and it gives us a lot to think about.
For sure. And I think it's just so important to approach all of it with, I guess I'd say like childlike wonder, even though
Sure.
that sounds very whimsical and, whatever, it makes it almost seem dreamy. But, being curious, just stay curious about other people, stay curious about other ways of doing things and just being open to at least looking at it,
Yeah.
whether or not you adopt it as one of your um, values or one of your ways of doing things, or you change up how you do things because you've seen this new perspective. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but just being willing to look at it makes all the difference.
Yeah, openness is really important. And if that helps you, kind of to describe it in that way, I think a lot of people, it does help them. For some people, they feel uncomfortable with that phrasing, but the same concept still is helpful. Be open, absorb new information, um, you know, assume positive intent with the information that comes to you, with the communication that comes to you, and you can learn from it. You can learn from all the experiences in your life.
Absolutely, I love that. So I know everyone's going to want to get your book. They're going to want to learn more about you, Robyn. Where can listeners find more information about you?
So definitely follow along. I am on TikTok and Instagram, and I try to make content pretty frequently, daily, if not more. So definitely follow along. And then if you want to get in contact with me or learn more about me, my website is robynlgarrett.com. And yeah, the books are out there. So my workbook is on Amazon, and my uh, the Be Happy at Work is available anywhere. So you can get that from any online retailer or physical retailer, whatever you prefer.
Beautiful. I have links to your website, to your workbook, and to your book
Perfect.
in show notes just to make it easy, click and go. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for contributing to the happiness of the workforce because it's so very important, especially in the world we live in today. So I think that your messaging is just beautiful and so needed.
Yeah, I do my best. I try to bring people together. I want people to feel like they're not alone because it's such hard work to attempt these new techniques and strategies. And you're not alone. There's so many people who care, who are trying to do their best. And I love getting to meet with them, talk with them, create this content. It's very important to me.
Thank you, Robyn. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for listening. It's been great.